to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast with financial planner and retirement specialist Dan Haylett. In this podcast, Dan explores ways to help you overcome the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Join Dan for the journey where he will explore how our wonderful human brain will naturally fight against what it takes to live a happy, healthy and wealthy retirement. Dan will draw on years of expertise, experience and expert guests to solve the behavioural, emotional and financial challenges of life after work. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast. I'm your host, Dan Haylett. Now, today's conversation is one that I've been so looking forward to for months. This has been organised for a while as I get to sit down and chat with the undisputed father of life planning, founder of the Kinder Institute of Life Planning, and which has trained more than 4,000 professionals in the field of life planning. He's the author of amazing books on money, freedom, and mindfulness. It's the one and only George Kinder. George, a very warm welcome to the Humans vs. Retirement podcast.
Great, Dan. I've been looking forward to this for months myself. Wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of it. And I know you're in Massachusetts at the moment. You live in Hawaii as well. You spent some time out there. Obviously, some sad stuff going on out in Hawaii, and I know you're doing some, thinking about some fundraising stuff. So I'll put some links to all this stuff in the show notes. And thank you for taking time out and joining us.
I spend a lot of time in England and in London in particular. So just to add that to the mix, they're my three favorite places. So
you are well travelled. I know that's well travelled. George, on that topic, you've had a long and wonderfully successful career and life so far. I know we could take up a whole episode just talking about it, but I'd love for you to give the listeners a brief overview of your career and how and why you found life planning, the impact that's had on you, your clients and the profession, and kind of where how you've got to where you are today.
Great. Thanks, Dan. I think that there are two things, just looking at that question, there are two major moments or epochs in my life. One of them had to do with me personally, in terms of the development of life planning, and then the other one had to do with the industry. And the one personally was that I never wanted to be a financial person. I didn't want to work for a living. I mean, maybe there are other people. I mean, I wanted to be creative. I wanted to have a deep life. Last thing I wanted to do was work for a boss or work for money in some way. But I had to, right? Because I could never get anybody to pay a dime for one of my poems. So I started doing tax returns for a living. And I went to graduate school in accounting, and I placed third, I think, on the CPA exam in Massachusetts. I was a star in a way. I was very good at it all. But I was going to do tax returns part of the year and then be able to do what I wanted the rest of the year. And two things happened. One, I was very good at it, so I built up a business pretty quickly. The second thing is that I never stopped wanting to do something else. And I know your focus is a lot on, in your life and in your careers, on retirement. Well, I was ready to retire right from the get-go. And I wanted to figure out how. And that was an incredible question for me. So that led me to become certified as a financial planner, and then to figure out different models of how I could get free as quickly as possible. And then the strange thing happened was that I realized that my clients were feeling the same way as me. I mean, they didn't necessarily want to have a creative life, but they didn't want to be tied to the dollar or the pound. They wanted to have a life of their own choosing. And so I thought, gosh, how can I get to the bottom of this for them so that I can help them? And that helped me to design what became ultimately, we call our programs EVOKE, which is an acronym for a 5-phase process. But it led to the 3 questions, which I know you're familiar with, and really designing how to inspire the client to kind of look at and determine what would be their absolute best life. And then us coming back to our financial skills and going, well, this is what you do. Well, I say us, but at the time it was just me. And then, like 20 years later, I happened on, I'm not going to tell you the long story, but that was a comedy of errors as well. But I happened on getting out in the national scene and giving a national talk. And I was the rage at this particular conference. So very quickly developed a think tank that became an international think tank. And all about this question of money and the meaning of life, which is related to retirement in a way, because, in retirement, we're thinking, again, what's the meaning of my life and what am I going to do? So it was at that point that I wrote the 7 Stages book, which has a lot of psychology in it, but is really almost more a philosophy of money and how do you deal with your life. But then what I did was I realized that after training a number of people in that, I thought they were all doing it wrong. And they were all using primarily psychological tools. They hadn't been trained as being therapists. And so on an envelope, kind of quickly, I sketched what would make a great interview or series of interviews that would lead a client to live the life that they feel they're really meant to live. So there was, and then I spread it all over America, and took it to 30 countries internationally. So that's really personally. And then 20 years later, going, hey, I want to bring this to other people. Yeah.
And you've certainly done that. I mean, I think your work from those beginnings of filling in those tax returns, and I think the light bulb moments you had really early on, understanding that, and I've said it before, kind of, money is a lightning rod for emotions and life. But actually, if we don't plan life first, money has no meaning. And an industry of financial people that were focused on actually probably the wrong thing, ironically, the thing that everyone's trained on. And I think that realization early on has led to such a wonderful movement, some wonderful books, and you have absolutely got the title of Father of Life Planning for all of those reasons. So, and I think you've said before, financial life planning is financial planning done right, and starting with the human, starting with the person, has to be the place that this starts in order for their money to have the biggest impact on their life. And you hit the nail on the head, George. Retirement is a word that I would ideally probably like banned, but that's almost impossible. I want to run with the word retirement and try and change its meaning. We can retire at any age if we plan life right. It does, we can design a life that we don't ever want to retire from. And I think that's definitely what you've done with your poetry and, and your writing and et cetera. So, and I think that's kind of the biggest thing that I take away from your work and stuff that I've implemented in the families and couples and people I work with. Getting that bit done has the biggest impact, right?
Absolutely, and it's not just on their lives, although that's really the most important thing to us in our engagement with them, which is an intimate engagement. It's one-on-one or one on a couple, but also for civilization. This is something for people to live who they really want to be. Now you're talking about putting all of their skills, their intelligence, everything they've grown up with, their DNA, to its right purpose, and that's a cool thing. Really cool.
Absolutely. I think that kind of leads into the question that I'd love to ask, and I ask most people on the pod, but also kind of that piece where there is this misconception around retirement, because this thing that that we feel it's the end, or it's near the end, or we're leaving a life behind. But actually what we are going into is a phase of our lives with huge amounts of accumulated skill and wisdom and knowledge and understanding, that actually our contribution to civilization in our 50s and 60s is probably as impactful as it could ever be. So why would that group of people ever decide to withdraw from society, which is the literal meaning of retire? So, I think more than ever, we need to encourage people to get out there and have energy and have enthusiasm and put their skills to the best use possible to help civilization into its next phase.
Yeah. It's we know we're on the opposite side of the puddle right now, but we're on the same side when it comes to understanding that things are awry, things are off somehow, and so we need, and to some extent, we need all hands on deck. But the great thing, and you're right, the great thing about modern retirement, as I think you've called it, is that we have so many resources inside of ourselves and out in the world to make a difference. But the thing that will really get our clients going is having a really reflective conversation, trustworthy conversation with them, where we're exceptional listeners, and we're just asking very simple questions as to where they want to go. Because sometimes I found that, somebody's been working two jobs. I had one client, and what he wanted to do was just watch TV. And I supported it because he was so burnt out. This was the next phase that he had to go through. So what is part of our job, I think, is to be really great listeners, and for the client to be able to convey that in a way that the client gets that. Nobody's going to be more exceptional at listening to who you really want to be than a life planner. And that's what has surprised a lot of people working with registered life planners, that they have the best conversation they've ever had in their life talking to that person.
That's the hugely privileged position that I see that we have in our clients and families' lives. I've said it before, I don't see any other profession, person in the lives of our clients that can and is willing to have that conversation, and actually where our clients feel happy and comfortable to open up to a level. So where do the public go to have deep and meaningful conversations about their money and their life? There's not many places that they would go. So we have that privileged position. Most people that I meet want to unload. Sometimes it takes a few meetings and you build that trust, but they want to unload. They want to understand what it means. And I think, society for a number of years has been deprived of the ability to do that. So, all kudos to the movement that you've created, and everyone that's, you've not just helped 4,000 people, George. You've helped tens, tens and hundreds of thousands of people that have read the book and done stuff. So I think that's really, really important to understand. I would love to get your take as someone that has retired many years ago. Obviously, from if we kind of take the notion that you never wanted to work and you do something that you love and working with a number of clients through this process, and then obviously working with the thousands of financial planning professionals and life planning professionals. In your opinion, what do you think is or some of the biggest challenges when it comes to this modern man-made thing that we've come to label retirement?
Yeah, I think you've touched on some of it already, Dan, and I'm pleased to hear. In some way, we've got to break that notion. I mean, there are many people who have a plan for retirement, a particular time for retirement, a job that fosters that through tax vehicles or through other kinds of programs. But the the tragic thing is that some of them never really got to reflect on or think that they had any other choice. And it's not to diss retirement, because for those people who've gone through that, but it's rather that what is most helpful is to understand who we really want to be and what we really want to do with our lives. And you might think that, oh, I've got to work and I've got to work till this age and then I can retire. But that's not necessarily true. It certainly hasn't been true for me. And what I've discovered by working with the registered life planners over the years is that it doesn't work for a lot of their clients. That so many of their clients have been able to identify something that is really pretty cool and pretty exciting. And it may have a retirement date from the work that they're doing, but no longer are they thinking about retirement as being this thing. They're thinking about, I'm going to live a rich life. I'm going to live in freedom. I mean, and freedom's starting pretty much right now. I mean, because if you get excited about where you're going, all that passion and energy goes into your job, but it also goes into all these other things that you were holding back from, thinking you couldn't have them. So
it's really interesting the amount of people that I've worked with over the years that you kind of go through, trying to design their life and what they want to do post full-time work, and you put together some plans, and there might be some monetary concerns that they have to work another year or 18 months or something like that to get where they need to get to. And they come in and they're a little bit distraught about that. But actually, when you energize them about what they're going to, the amount of people that say, oh, work wasn't that bad for the last year because I wasn't focusing on the bad thing. I was looking forward to the thing that we've planned and I've been thinking about for years, but never been able to dream big.
Exactly. That's that happens in so many different ways, and that's an incredible way. And I would see that. I haven't worked with individual clients in many years, but in the old days, I would see that all the time. Totally makes sense. And working with some of the advisors now over the last 20 years, training them in this methodology, what I found with them, even though they might be staying on with work, you were talking about full-time work. I might shift from someone who's working a 50 or 60-hour week down to 40, or someone who's working a 5-hour week down to a 5-day week down to a 4-day week, and they'd be really scared about it because they think that they would not be able to make the living, that they wanted, and they ended up being so much more productive because they were doing in that extra time what they were passionate about. And there was no longer this kind of dark cloud hanging over them that was that they were constantly bouncing against with guilt or despair or depression. Instead, they were filled with life, just as you're saying. I can be the person that I want to be. Fabulous. Yeah.
I want to touch on the V of your evoke process, if I may, for a minute, because I do think one of the things that I do see is people, they don't dream big enough and they lack vision. They haven't really sat down to think about what this vision looks like. They've been caught in the rat race on the hedonic treadmill. They've just been, and they've not given themselves time and permission to do this. Can you just talk me through some of your thoughts around building a vision for life?
Yeah, fantastic. It's a great question, and I want to contrast it with how clients will often come into their first meeting with a financial advisor, and the financial advisor, instead of being focused on the client and who the client wants to be and is meant to be, they're focused on the money. And so the first question they might ask the client is, well, how much money do you need? And the client looks back at them and is thinking, what do you mean, bud? I mean, you're the money guy. Well, if you're the money guy, you're going to make me all the money that I need. Let's say, how about 20 million pounds, And so they just toss it out there. They toss out a figure. They don't know what they're talking about. But then we, as the financial advisor, we're scribbling it down, 20 million pounds. Gosh, how are we, I'm going to have to talk them down from that. How are they going to get that? Totally on the wrong foot right from the very beginning. And so when you talk about not being big enough, it's not necessarily big enough in terms of money, but it's big enough in terms of who they want to be and how they want to impact their family, the world, their community, what they want to do that's extraordinary, that they feel they were born to and they haven't been able to. And that's the kind of bigness we want to talk about. And what we've done, we found that two things work there. One is, I mentioned it earlier, just really being a good listener. So one of the things we train people in to become registered is listening skills. How do you listen so that the client knows you're there, feels connected? And how do you listen so when the client hits a tough spot, you're empathic? Or when they go, I just love gardening, then you big smile on your face. You go, yeah, man. I mean, you just, wherever they go, the highs or the lows, you're there and you meet them. And the client begins to feel, oh, this person gets me. And so then the next meeting is the V meeting. That's the meeting you're talking about. And there, we typically give often as homework, but sometimes in the meeting itself, we give a number of different exercises. There's one I'm pretty famous for called the 3 questions. But we give them, they're exercises that are kind of reflective as to what you really want to be about, who you really want to be. So rather than focusing on how much you want for your house and how much you want for your car and how much do you have to pay for your kids, that's all important and we'll get there. But the first thing is, what's the vision of who you really want to be in your life and how you want to live it?
I think this is so important and it's so important to spend time there. I see so many people that there isn't enough airspace and time given at that point. That can take 1 meeting, 2 meetings. The true vision can come out in meeting 5, 6, 10. I think we need to meet the client where they are, and some clients, some people need more work than others in terms of making sure that this vision matches in with exactly who they think they are, because some people have never explored this in themselves ever. There's two, and actually I think it's really hard if you're in your 50s and you've never sat down with someone to kind of really, even your spouse who's probably sitting next to you, that you've been married to for a number of years and got children, the chances are, in my experience, that you actually haven't had that "this is who I want to be" conversation with them, right? Because life has just kind of got there, and you both. There's a lot of research out there, George, isn't there? This kind of assumption that you both think the same thing, which doesn't, she. When do you want to retire? 65. Is that when your husband or wife wants to? Oh yeah, no, they're the same as me. Like that kind. It's like, well, have you asked? No. So there's a couple of points I want to go on. I think it's really important to, I've taken on clients that I remember one story where I had an initial conversation meeting with a client who was seeing other financial advisors as well, just to do a bit of a beauty parade, even though, with who they would like to work with. And I remember them phoning me up about half an hour after our meeting. They were still driving on the way home. And they said, "Oh, we'd really like to work with you, Dan," and that. And I said, "Oh, lovely, can't wait. Really excited to get going. May I ask why?" Having known that I was, I think, financial advisor 5 out of 5 that they were seeing, and they said, "You still haven't asked me how much money I've got." And I was like, "Well, that's not important, right?" So, it was the first question that the other 4 advisors led with, and I hadn't even asked that question yet. So I think it's really important to understand that understanding someone and the foundations of them leads to great, proper, real financial planning and life planning. George, I think if you may share, I'd love, I think vision's a really important topic just to stay on for a couple of minutes. And your famed 3 questions, I think, are a big part of how a vision can be created. Are you happy to kind of just run through what those 3 are and how that can then have an impact on people? Because I think the listeners would, for the listeners out there, time to get a pen and paper. note these down and have a really think and sit down with your spouse and go through the answers to these questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, for the listeners out there, you want to do these. You want to answer these questions individually. And it's better at the beginning not to share them with your spouse, just do them and then come together and look. And it's often good to do that part with an advisor, if you have an advisor who is a life planner, because they'll know how to help, wherever there's differences. But what's amazing with couples is that they fall in love again, because they see things, they go, oh, do you still like to do that? I didn't know you, or that's totally new. That's incredible. So there's those little tweaks of affection that we as advisors get the privilege of being in on for a moment. But that love is real and strong and develops and deepens. But it's because of the differences, not because you go, hey, you want to do it at 65, I want to do it at 60, and you have this kind of battle around it. No, as an advisor, if one of you wants to do it at 65, I want to get you there. And if the other wants to do it at 60, I want to get you there. And that's the great thing about going to a real life planner, is you can do that. So the 3 questions, they are really cool, and I'm happy you're doing them at home because you can reflect on them a bit. And often I will give them as homework. The first one's just, it's almost like you win the lottery. You may not be as rich as J.K. Rowling or Elon Musk, but you've got all the money you need for the rest of your life. All the money you need. Now that's clearly, it's your determination, not Dan's or mine or some other financial advisor. All the money you need for the rest of your life. If you had that, what would you do with your life? And so it's almost like you win a lottery, a little modest lottery, decent sized lottery, and you go, oh wow, look, I could do this and this and this, and just have fun with it. So that's one that you dream with, and often that has more material things than the other 2 questions, maybe more experiences too in some ways, but and we use it to just loosen you up, so you have the range of things you're interested in. The second question, we go deeper, and you'll see why we'd never ask this first, because you have to have, as an advisor, you have to have a really trusting relationship with your client to ask a question that involves death. And the second question is, you go to your doctor and they shock you with the news that you only have 5 to 10 years left to live. And the good news is that you're going to feel as healthy as you feel right now. But the bad news is that sometime after year 5, but before year 10, and you can't identify exactly when, you're just going to keel over. There you're gone. You're gone. And so the question is, if you had you had that time limit, what would shift? What would you, how would you spend your life? And whenever I give this, I gave a workshop, a 7-stage, it's still being given by trainers that I've trained in our community, but and all over the world. But I would give this exercise, and people would raise their hands and they go, do I still have all the money I need? And the answer is really, it probably should be poignant. So you probably ought to just have what you got right now. 5 to 10 years left. What would you do? And you can see it gets more personal. You probably think more about your family and kids. Most people do, but not everybody. You may think about something that you've always really longed to do, and you've never kind of taken the time or taken the risk to take it on. So that's the second question. You can see it gets deeper, and therefore we're getting more meaningful. We're getting closer to what a life plan really is about, which is your life. And then the third question goes deeper still. It starts with the same premise that you go to the doctor, and again, you have this rare ailment, but this time they really shock you by telling you only have 24 hours left to live. And it's not what would you do, it's not, where's the pub, or, gathering the family or something like, neither of those things. It's reflecting on your life and what you'd anticipated coming up. What did you miss? Who did you not get to be? What did you not get to do? And This is the funny thing, Dan, and I know you know this from working with these. But I want to get you on our program, so you're running with the evoke process, which is what this is. But the funny thing is that the life plan primarily is born there in that third question, because it's life and death. It's like legacy. This is who I'm meant to be. And you've played with the questions, you've done the questions in your work enough that you've seen that again and again, I'm sure. And so that's really something that, and part of what happens for clients is there's most of the time what happens is the client goes to that question and they go, gosh, why haven't I done this? I'm so stupid. Why haven't I accomplished this? It looks pretty simple. It's not like buying an island in the Mediterranean. This is really pretty simple. I could do this. So occasionally one gets a little despondent and going, oh gosh, and we beat ourselves up for not doing it. But that's the reason that a great life planner is there, because they know the secret is just get busy. Let's make it happen. And we aim to make it happen, or someone being launched on the path within months, certainly within a year and a half, they're launched. It's not like they necessarily have that island, but they're taking their 2-week vacation or their month-long vacation, or they've now got 3 months of vacation they're taking, or they're working remotely. They're getting there, and we've helped strategize how to make it happen. What a difference that makes in a life.
I get goosebumps just by kind of listening to you ask those questions. I'm not even answering them, because I know the impact that they have. I think you wrote a book called Lighting the Torch, which is what you just said. It's light the torch, light the fire. The journey is almost as good as the destination. We're psychologically wired as human beings to enjoy a journey. So even being on the path, the destination doesn't have to happen, right? It doesn't have to. We ideally want it, but it doesn't have to happen. And I think the beauty of that question for me is that's where a true life-centered vision is born from, as you said. And I think a lot of people start in the wrong place. They try and build a vision from today looking forward. But again, there's a lot of research about actually starting at the end and looking backwards. So if you start at the end, and go, what would I regret? What have I missed? I think it's a lot easier for people to build visions. I'm a big fan of what I call anti-goals, right? I think we have a very tough time as human beings articulating goals, what we do want to happen, because we just don't know what's possible. But I think what you can open up on is what you don't want to happen. When I ask people in a question around, what have you observed in family and friends' retirements that you don't want to happen to you? And you get all of this. It's kind of like, well, they sat on the chair for 15 years. They just stopped work and then killed over within 2 years. They blew all their money going out. They drunk more, and all of a sudden you've got this long list of stuff they don't want to happen. And I'm like, well, I can make sure that doesn't. And I think that's just as impactful, right?
Absolutely. And I think what happens when you're able to articulate that vision is that the reason it all happens is you get passionate about making it happen. And because it's who you really want to be. It's who you've always wanted to be. And at first you might not be aware of it because society doesn't set that up. It's not written in the Financial Times. It's not there you won't find it in the newspapers and or the blogs or the journals. So we're doing it. We're pioneers in this, and if we can get the client's passion going, there ain't nothing going to stop them. It's just incredible. Yeah.
And I think coming back to the retirement thing, I think look. We know that you can retire at any time and all that, but actually for a lot of people, I think the moment that you get to a point where you are thinking about getting more freedom, being financially independent, this is probably the opportunity, or the best opportunity for a lot of people since their late teens, to actually be the person they want to be. I think work gets hold of you, career gets hold of you, family gets hold of you. And for all the right reasons, you do the things that you do to make that happen. But I say to other people, this is the first time you can be childlike again, be curious and explore and understand and so it's such a great opportunity, but that has to start with that vision.
Right on. And couldn't agree with you more. It's a beautiful thing. It's really a beautiful thing.
I want to go to kind of, we mentioned the journey as being exciting. I want to kind of touch on your wonderful work in terms of mindfulness, and I know you're a big meditator and you do a lot of work on kind of mindfulness practices, and think about being in the moment. And I think it's really difficult in modern society, particularly for people thinking about stepping back from work and kind of what to do with their life and building this vision. I think it's really difficult to kind of to be in the moment. And we know that that's where kind of well-being exists, happiness exists. If we look back or look forward, we often kind of put our head in a space that causes anxiety or other things. I'd love to just get your thoughts on kind of being in the moment and focusing kind of there and then.
I'm just finishing up. You may know this, your audience doesn't, but I'm just finishing up kind of a legacy piece of work that I've been working on for 30 years. I never knew if I would finish it. COVID hit, and I got long COVID, man. And I thought, shoot, disease could get me like this, and I've got all this body of work that I've been putting together. So I got passionate about finishing that work, and in about 2 years, I will have completed 5 books, and they're books of poetry and photography, and they really are mindfulness based in nature. So it's environmental. It's we all love to be in nature, and there's a reason for it. It's where we're natural. It's what our senses call out to it. So during all that time, I was on a journey. I was passionate. What you're talking about, I had a passion about doing something and putting together something that eventually I thought I would finish. It turns out I suddenly woke up and realized, well, maybe I won't. I better get it done. But there's a question, there's a contrast here between having a vision and the energy and passion to go to it. And then, as you're saying, the present moment. There's a trick question that I ask many audiences. I can ask 1,000 people, and I'll get everybody to raise their hand. I'll say, it's a trick question, but I want you all to raise your hand. Have you ever had an experience of freedom in the past? And, walking the beach, making love, playing with your kids. And I get everybody to raise it, doing something really creative with your business or in life. I get everybody to raise their hand. They all remember something. And I go, great, cool. You all got it wrong. None of us have ever experienced a moment of freedom in the past. The only time we've ever experienced freedom is in the present moment. And then the kicker to the question is, so why in our schools, why in our lives, don't we have a practice that aims at the mastery of the present moment in our life? And so 2 of the 3 domains of freedom that I'm writing about are life planning is, your life is yours. That's one of the domains of freedom. But the other domain of freedom that's of the 2 of the 3 is each moment is yours. And when you understand each of those, you've got something to kind of work with that strengthens you as a person, brings more happiness into your life, more freedom into your life, more energy into your life. And they end up supporting each other. They end up supporting each other because the more you're living your life plan, the more you're able to be in the present moment, and vice versa.
You wrote in your book, Golden Civilization, which I'll link in the show notes. It's just such a wonderful, mind-blowing read that I encourage everybody to go and get. But I think you wrote something about freedom is complicated. And I think you've touched on it there, haven't you? I think we don't give freedom again, the airspace, and we think it's a relatively simple thing, right? To be free and the feeling of being free, but it's a really complicated subject and so unique to everybody. I think, and actually, I think we're wired as human beings for freedom of money, freedom of time, freedom of thought, freedom of relationships. And they all kind of mean different to everyone. I think it's a really complicated subject that I think we all need. We all need someone to talk to about what that means to us.
It's a wonderful thing. I mean, if you think about it, and again, speaking to your audience, if you think about what either freedom means to you or what happiness would mean to you or what you've always longed to do and not quite been able to, or held off and kept thinking it's going to come in 2 years, I'll be there. That's how I used to fool myself way back when. But if you had someone to talk to about it who was really going to be on your side and go, no, not 2 years. Let's nail it. Let's make it happen. And that's really what a financial life planner does. All of my books have been about freedom. And freedom, the behavioral scientists and all that, they can talk about freedom in general terms with studies of 1,000 or more people. But in fact, freedom is idiosyncratic to us individually. It's individual for each of us. It's unique because of our DNA, because of our background, because of our experience, because of our passions. And so, and it's so personal to us that to have someone that we really can enjoy talking to, where we really know they listen. And they're not knocking it down. They're going, yeah, you can't do that, can you? They're going, wow, wouldn't that be cool? And just going with you, riding with you. It frees us up to actually articulate who we want to be. And that's great. That's a great freedom. That's a great freedom.
100%. There's one area I want to explore before we hit kind of wind down, and I ask you a couple of questions. I ask of everybody that appears on the show, kind of touching on freedom and actually thinking about your book Golden Civilization, and kind of being ourselves. I think you touch on it in the book Golden Civilization about society, large institutions, kind of maybe depriving us of that feeling of freedom. We're kind of following the crowd. We're being somewhat brainwashed. We're not being ourselves. And I think it's really important, particularly going into a retirement when you're going to have more noise, more opinions, more time to kind of actually potentially kind of fall into the crowd. And I think it's so important to understand those mechanics, because more so than ever, we need to detach ourselves away from that and be truly authentic to who we are. Otherwise, it's very easy to get swept up in what modern society has now created.
Absolutely, and when I talk about the three domains of freedom, I talk usually first about the domain of each moment is yours. So if we can gather something that will give us a mastery of that, a great deal of peace comes to us, of ease, but also a lot of energy. And the second one is that your life is yours, and that's what you're talking about. And the forces of civilization. We thought, you guys did your own version of this, but in America, of course, we were throwing off the Mad King George, and you did your own version of that shortly thereafter in your own way. And, we were following you guys because of Magna Carta and, Parliament and all that kinds of stuff. So there's a wonderful, brotherly or sisterly relationship between the UK and the US. That I'm one of the reasons I'm passionate about spending many months a year in the UK. But this notion of civilization, the most important thing is that we live the life that we want to. But civilization has put some boundaries on it that really aren't necessary, and they come from, as you quote me, hierarchies of power. We've set up one of the incredible things that capitalism did was that it set up the ability for a corporation, first of all, to get capital, and then to leverage that capital enormously through borrowing, and then to leverage that capital even more by buying media sources, by funding nonprofits that support what they care for, so getting their message out. And what ends up happening is that it's the Mad King George again. There they are, dominating our life, and not always doing the stuff we'd like. Maybe they're undermining democracy in some way. Maybe the planet's burning up, and it's an unfortunate thing, but they're making their money. But anyway, so the civilization thing is important both because we want to live our own lives and have that life planning freedom. But also, I think one of the beauties of retirement is that we can take on the third domain of freedom is civilization. We're meant to live freely. That's why the Magna Carta is so inspiring. We're meant to live as free human beings. And life planning is, kind of a huge development there. But right now, in addition, we're seeing we're seeing war, and we're seeing, climate change and all these kind of things. And it's important that we take on civilization as a domain of freedom as well. And one of the great things about retirement is that many of us have enormous skills we've built up over time. And we can make a difference out there, whether it's mentoring or it's challenging the institutions, speaking truth to power. But we can do it, and I'm excited about that. And that's my next projects are actually out there more in civilization. Let's make civilization live the same way we want to live, in a freedom that delivers maximum freedom to everybody on the planet.
Absolutely concur. I think it's and as I said at the start, I think I meet some absolutely wonderful, fascinating people that half of them don't understand the skills and the knowledge they can bring to younger generations, to smaller companies, to charitable organizations, and again lighting that fire and that torch and truly understanding what how to. It's not even give back. I kind of don't like that. It feels like this is actually I can make an impact.
Yeah.
Far beyond anything that I've ever thought.
Your term "give back." That is, I hadn't thought of that, Dan. But I have framed it in a different way. But we've been trained to think it's giving back, haven't we? I mean, that's the term that we use. But in fact, it's creating something. It's actually making civilization. It's innovating. It's making civilization anew. And so it's much more than just giving. Giving back's good, but creating's incredible too. Yeah,
absolutely. George, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I think we could absolutely go on for another 50 minutes, hour, but I'd love to wrap this up with you, if I may, and ask you 3 questions. I've got my own version. They're not as deep and meaningful as your 3, unfortunately. But and to be fair, you've probably answered all of them throughout our conversation. But to wrap it up, I'd love to understand, number 1, what does George Kinder's retirement in brackets look like?
Yeah, well, I haven't mentioned my family. I mean, they're huge for me, and living this wildly creative life is huge. As well, living in nature is huge. So visiting London, Hawaii, and New England are great. I think primarily, Dan, it's living in those 3 domains of freedom. Really knowing that at any minute, if I get blocked in one way or another, internally, myself or civilization's blocking me, I can go right to the moment itself and go, let's be free here. Just experience what it is to be free in this moment. And if I feel energy, I go to my life plan. Woo, isn't this cool? This is a lot of fun. I've got a lot of passion here. And then if I see something that's going wrong in civilization, with an institution that's keeping me on hold we call the health services and they keep you on hold for an hour. What kind of indignity is that? That's ridiculous. So, I'll let somebody know and try to change things. So I think living in those 3 domains is going to be key for me.
I want to take you back 30 years to your financial planner days, if I may. And I'm sitting across the desk from you. We've had a wonderful chat.
Yeah.
We've done all the planning work. We have established that I've got enough money to live the life I want. If you could send me out the office with one tip to live a happy, healthy, and wealthy retirement, what would that one tip be?
Well, if I am merely your financial advisor, I would say go find a registered life planner or someone like Dan. Go find someone who will listen and really connect with you around your inspiration. You and I have done everything we can, but what's important now is your life. Find the person that will put that all together. That would be the one tip I think I'd give.
Amazing. And I think what's interesting about that is the guidance that's needed thereafter, isn't it? I think it's not a life planning by its sheer nature is wrong, because life happens and we don't know what the future holds. So the ability to continuously have conversations and guide and move those plans are so important.
Yeah. There's 124 registered life planners in England. And as you've said, a lot of people have been influenced by the books that I've written and the talks and done briefer trainings. And this is a strong field right now in England, and maximize it, not just in England, but in the whole United Kingdom. Yeah.
So to finish on a really positive note, we've talked about some of the challenges, and we know that kind of a modern day world and retirement is noisy and full of distractions, and we're not necessarily, mentally wired to cope with what retirement is. And we know the transition from work to, life after work is challenging for people. But what do you think, and you've touched on this a bit, but what do you think is the biggest opportunity that a modern day retirement brings someone?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest opportunity is just every opportunity. It's like the world. We've designed the world in some incredible ways. There are so many resources that we have that our ancestors certainly didn't have. My dad didn't have them. My mother didn't have them. Grandparents didn't have them. And so there's incredible resources to have fun, just simply to have a great time, to be connected with your family in ways that never happened before, to be connected globally, to go inside yourself and seek awakening of some sort or other. I mean, there are all these different things that you can do. Change the world, change civilization. And suddenly you've got your 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week to do that. So it's amazing what's out here, what we can do. It's really very exciting.
That's such a wonderful place, I think, to finish this just such wonderful conversation. George, it's been an absolute honour and pleasure and privilege to have you on the podcast, to have this conversation with you today. And I really want to thank you for your time and your wisdom and everything you've done for this kind of wonderful profession of ours.
My pleasure, Dan. Thanks so much for having me.
It's been awesome. Thanks, George. And look, thank you all for once again listening in to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you with me as always today. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Subscribe to be notified when new episodes become available. We would love to have you along for the journey. If you like what you heard, then we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to leave us a review. And lastly, if you want to explore your retirement plans further, download our free 7-step retirement GPS toolkit linked in the show notes. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of TFP or Dan Haylett. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, so please always seek the advice of professionals with any questions you may have regarding your retirement.